Have you ever noticed how stress feels different for different people? Some people under pressure become laser focused and calm, almost thriving on the challenge, while others feel completely overwhelmed, exhausted, or anxious. Why is that? Why can two people face the same stressor, say a big work deadline or a relationship conflict, and have such different reactions? That question lies at the heart of something we call the HPA axis, short for hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis, the body's central stress response system. In many ways, it's like your body's internal conductor, coordinating the rhythm between your brain, your hormones, and your organs. It decides how much energy you have, how deeply you rest, and how you adapt to the world around you. When the HPA axis is balanced, we feel stable, alert when we need to be, calm when we can be. When it's out of balance, it can show up as anxiety, depression, fatigue, insomnia, burnout, even physical symptoms like gut issues or inflammation. Today, I want to unpack what the HPA axis is, why functional testing like the Dutch test gives us such important insights, and how understanding this system can help reshape how we think about mental health. Let's start with the basics. Imagine your brain as a command center. When it perceives a threat, real or imagined, it sends a signal from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, which then signals the adrenal glands, perched like little hats on the top of your kidneys. Those adrenals release cortisol, your main stress hormone. Cortisol isn't bad. In fact, it's essential. It gives you the energy to wake up in the morning, focus during the day, and respond to challenges. The problem isn't cortisol itself, it's how consistent or dysregulated that system becomes over time. Under healthy conditions, cortisol follows a natural curve. It rises sharply in the morning, like the sunrise in your body, giving you energy and alertness. Then it gradually tapers down throughout the day, preparing you for rest at night. But when we live under chronic stress, emotional, physical, or even hidden physiological stress like inflammation or blood sugar swings, that rhythm flattens or flips. You might wake up tired, feel wired at night, or experience anxiety that seems to come out of nowhere. That's the HPA axis trying to adapt, and eventually struggling to keep up. What's fascinating is that the HPA axis isn't just about the stress response, it's about perception. Your body's reaction depends on how your brain interprets the world. That means early trauma, chronic worry, unresolved grief, they all shape how your stress system behaves today. So when we talk about mental health, we're not just talking about neurotransmitters in the brain. We're talking about a whole body network that's continuously in conversation. So how do we actually see what's happening inside this system? Traditional medicine often looks at cortisol using a single blood test, maybe a morning cortisol level. That's like trying to understand a movie by looking at one frame. Functional testing, like the Dutch test, which stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones, takes a very different approach. Instead of one snapshot, it captures your cortisol rhythm over a 24-hour period. It measures both cortisol and its inactive form, cortisone, as well as related hormones like DHEA, melatonin, and metabolites of estrogen and testosterone. What that means is we can actually see your circadian pattern, how your cortisol rises in the morning, how it declines, and whether your body's recycling and detoxifying those hormones efficiently. For instance, if your cortisol is elevated all day, you might be in a state of hyperarousal, anxiety, restlessness, irritability. If it's low all day, that could point toward burnout, depression, or chronic fatigue. Sometimes cortisol is high at night when it should be low, which explains those people who lie in bed exhausted but wired. This kind of pattern recognition is powerful. It helps us understand the why behind symptoms instead of just labeling them. Because a person's mood, energy, sleep, and focus are not just psychological, they're deeply physiological. By using functional testing, we can see whether the system's overactive, underactive, or simply mistimed. And that helps us tailor interventions with precision, not just with medication, but with lifestyle, nutrition, and body work. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Over the last few decades, research in psychoneuroendocrinology, that's the study of how hormones, brain, and emotions interact, has shown that HPA axis dysfunction is linked to almost every major psychiatric condition. For example, depression is often associated with blunted or flattened cortisol curve, meaning the system has lost its rhythm. Anxiety disorders can correlate with elevated or erratic cortisol output, leading to hypervigilance and poor sleep. PTSD often shows low cortisol but high CRH, the brain's signaling hormone, meaning the body is stuck in a loop of prepare for threat without the resources to act. Bipolar disorder and psychosis often follow patterns of cortisol dysregulation, particularly during episodes. Cortisol also influences neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, and affects neuroplasticity. Chronic high cortisol can shrink the hippocampus, the area responsible for memory and emotion regulation, and enlarge the amygdala, which processes fear. So when someone says, "I feel anxious for no reason," there's always a reason, even if that reason is invisible. It's not in your head. It's not all in your head. It's also in your adrenal rhythm, your blood sugar, your inflammation, your sleep patterns, your sense of safety. And here's where Gabor Mate's work resonates deeply. Trauma doesn't just leave psychological scars, it rewires the body's perception of threat. The HPA axis becomes conditioned to stay alert even when the danger is long gone. That means healing has to happen on both levels, understanding the story and restoring the physiology. The body remembers, but it also relearns. The body remembers, but it can also relearn. So how do we bring the system back into coherence? The beauty is there's many ways, and they all reinforce one another. The first domain is lifestyle and rhythm. Start with the basics: sleep, sunlight, movement, and meals at regular times. Your HPA axis loves rhythm. It thrives on predictability. Morning sunlight exposure rests your circadian rhythm and helps cortisol rise naturally. Evening darkness signals melatonin release. Regular meals stabilize blood sugar, which prevents those emergency cortisol spikes throughout the day. Gentle exercise like walking, yoga, or strength training also supports cortisol balance. Too much intense exercise, especially when burned out, can make things worse. The second is behavioral and psychotherapeutic approaches. Techniques like mindfulness, somatic awareness, and trauma-informed therapy help regulate the perception of threat. Remember, the HPA axis responds not just to what's happening, but what the brain believes is happening. Practices that reconnect body and mind, like breath work, body scanning, or compassionate inquiry techniques, practices that reconnect the body and mind, like breath work or body scanning, teach the nervous system that it's safe to rest again. Even 5 minutes of slow, diaphragmatic breathing can reduce cortisol, and that's measurable. The third is nutritional and nutraceutical support. Certain nutrients directly support adrenal health. Vitamin C, B vitamins, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, and zinc are foundational. Adaptogenic herbs like ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil, and licorice root have been shown in studies to modulate cortisol response, improving resilience and fatigue. Other compounds like phosphatidylserine or L-theanine help soothe the stress response, improving focus and sleep. But these aren't one-size-fits-all solutions. That's why functional testing matters. It tells us which direction the system needs to go. If cortisol is low, we don't want to suppress it further. If it's high, we don't want to overstimulate. Testing provides a compass for personalized care. And 4, integrative and coherence-based work. Finally, the psychospiritual dimension. Healing the HPA axis is about restoring coherence, the harmony between body, mind, and meaning. When you slow down enough to listen to your body, to the fatigue, the irritability, the anxiety, you start to hear what it's asking for. Often, symptoms are not enemies. They're messages from the system trying to return to balance. That perspective transforms mental health from a problem to fix into a process of reconnection. So when we talk about mental health through the lens of the HPA axis, we're talking about the intersection of biology, psychology, and life experience. We're recognizing that stress isn't just emotional, it's chemical, and healing isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Understanding the HPA axis gives us a language for that bridge. It helps us see how our bodies carry our stories, and how, through awareness and support, those stories can evolve. So if you've been feeling burnt out, anxious, or chronically tired, it's worth exploring what your HPA axis might be telling you. I go into much more detail about this in my blog. You can find that article, along with links to my practice and my training program for clinicians, in the description below. Because understanding your stress system isn't just about managing symptoms. It's about restoring coherence, reclaiming your vitality, and living from a place of balance again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.